All right. Okay. I had a couple of things that I thought might be useful. How many people here are drummers? One, two. Oh, four. Cool, cool. All right. And no one else is a drummer, right? Okay, so I was trying to think of what to talk about, since the majority of people, well, if anyone would show up, I just figured that most of you wouldn't be drummers. So I was trying to think of something that would be useful generally for musicians, no matter what instrument that you happen to play. But I think rhythm is something that is incredibly powerful for everyone. So I thought I'd focus on time, note placement, and spacing, like the spaces in between the notes, because that applies to everybody, rhythm, time, note placement, and not being afraid of rhythm in general. There's some things that I've worked on aside from studying jazz and playing like a bunch of different dialects of music, is trying to find out what the commonalities were, between all of these styles or dialects. And rhythm is the connecting tissue between everything. And math, feel, rhythm, and time. That connects everything. Some of the things that I work on that were useful to me in every situation that I've been in was trying to figure out what glues everything together. So like if you're a saxophone player or a singer, usually the singer or the saxophone player or guitar player or whatever you play, who has the best time or the better time and the better rhythm, they're ultimately going to be better equipped players. Some of the things I work on are concentrating on the spaces in between the notes. Like a lot of people, when they play, like whatever it is you play, they concentrate more on the actual note that they're playing or singing. But not as many people realize this. The note that you're not playing has just as much value, like the rest or the silence in between those notes. That's kind of what makes everything sound the way you want it to sound. So what I mean is, like, let's say I'm playing like a simple backbeat. Now, what makes that feel good is what's happening in between those notes. So if there's like an eighth note rest or a quarter note rest, in my mind, and this is just my approach or my philosophy, the rest is just as important as the note that I actually play. So I'm not just concentrating on the sound that's coming out, I'm concentrating on what isn't happening in between those notes. That's what gives it sort of the hump or the groove or the swing. So when learning something like a part or just playing a groove, like if you anything that I'm playing, like big band or bebop or dance music, the first thing is to make sure that not only things are even and the spaces are enunciated just as clearly as the notes are, but note placement as well. And that's why the space is really important. That's when you can sort of uh, you can start to experiment with how it feels. Like if you wanted to feel a little bit, not dragging, never drag, but just a little further in the pocket, where let's say you're looking at a click in Pro Tools or Logic, and let's say this way's forward. So if the note that you play is like here, like just a little bit toward the end, each time, it's going to feel, it won't sound slow, it'll just sit in a certain way. But the way to do that is to understand the spacing. So let's get back to that backbeat. So if I play something like this, I have a technique. My hand is going like this, specifically to take advantage of those spaces. But it sounded like, if not dead on, maybe a little ahead. Now let's say I play the same thing and I want it to sit in the pocket a little bit more. Now it wasn't, I don't think it was slower, but it was just, the pocket was just a little fatter. And these are the things that, these are subtleties that I think one can only learn. Like, you can go to a workshop like this and I or someone else can tell you about these things, but it also comes from playing, not just in your practice room, but with actual people, in front of an audience. You know, there's a certain amount of danger involved because you're playing in front of people, and if you screw up, everyone, you know, you're in front of people. So not only do I recommend thinking more about these kinds of things, like about your placement, I would encourage you to play as much as you can with other musicians. And if you can, try to play with musicians that have a little more experience than you. I'm talking to people that have, I'm not talking to veterans, I'm talking to, you know, people that are just starting out. But play with people that have a little bit more experience than you, playing music, and listen to what's happening, and practice. Like it's a combination of both. That live experience and actually playing with people will really help you. It's one thing like when you work on a whole bunch of stuff in your practice room, but it's very different when you go out and you play live, and that's the only way that you're really going to know how to apply all of those things. Because when you're in your practice room, it's just theoretical. You know, it may sound good in your practice room, but when you go out and you try to do that stuff with a band, you'll find out like what's inappropriate and what isn't. You know what I mean? And so it's about making good choices. You may think in your mind, oh, this will be a cool thing to play here. But in reality, when you try it in that situation with real people, it might have been a terrible decision. So making good decisions, concentrating on your spacing, and note placement. So up until this point, do any of you have any questions about anything? Okay, I'll get him first and then you. Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you find out about those things, about placement? Like, did you have somebody that told you, like, oh, you know, if you play a little bit more in front, it's this, and then back this, or was it really more like experiencing by yourself?
It was a combination of both. But I mean, with me, it was more like trial by fire. Most of the gigs that I'd done when I was pretty young, they were all with like much older guys. And so I kind of put myself out there. I was practicing and studying a whole bunch of things. But I wanted to get out there and play with people and see what that really meant. And through those experiences of making a whole lot of mistakes in front of people and in front of a lot of musicians who were far older than me, um, I realized that, oh, okay, maybe all those things that I practiced um, are more or less tools. You know, what you're practicing is not the music. What you're practicing, well, I can only speak for myself. Like what I practice, I wanted to become a clear, clean conduit. So when something needed to be played, there was nothing hindering it. So that meant working on my technique, like solving problems, like technical problems, problems with my time, concepts, like studying a lot of metric modulation, going through the Gary Chafee books, just in case I needed that stuff. Um, uh, Listening to tons of records, going through these books, talking to older musicians, and getting on these gigs, and feeling the heat, feeling the pressure, and from being recommended to gigs that were, fairly well known at the time, needing to go there and like take the place of someone that had way more experience than I did. Those kind of pressure situations taught me a lot because I made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I wouldn't have even realized that they were mistakes until, if I had just been practicing and not out there playing with people, I wouldn't have known that, my spacing wasn't as comfortable as I thought it was because there was no one else playing. But when you have people playing with you, you have an actual bass player or an actual guitar player or a piano player or a keyboard, whatever it is, like you have to take into account what everyone else is doing and how everyone else feels the time. So and if you're a drummer, there's this delicate balance of like making sure that the band doesn't rush, making sure that the band doesn't slow down, and being like really strong, but you don't want to sound like a machine and inflexible. So there's this sort of like mental jujitsu that you have to do, where you're kind of playing with them. You're like, I hear you, I hear everything you're doing, but this is where the pulse is, and that's where like note placement and understanding the dialect of music that you're playing plays a huge role. And the only way that you can learn those lessons is to practice, but get out of the practice room, and you have to go out there and really play. Yes.
Mistake. Who told you it's a mistake?
Who?
Yeah.
Tons of people. I can't remember how many. I mean, I was pretty young, but I mean, they were encouraging, but they certainly weren't afraid to tell me what wasn't working.
Yeah, it's like hiring and being fired, right? But it doesn't go to that extent.
No, I mean, if it was terrible, I would have been fired. But I mean, it sounded good, but I don't know the way it is now. But back in those days, like the older musicians would set up kind of like an apprenticeship. They would hire someone that was younger if they could really play. So just getting the gig was like, wow. After that, it's like, okay, you have to hold it down. You have to really. You can't be okay. It's got to be great. That's the way it used to be. So if something wasn't there, they had no problems with letting me know very clearly, this is not happening. You need to get this together.
Can you make an example, like
From when?
From Wayne Shorter?
Wayne isn't a good example because he always spoke in metaphors. So I didn't know what he meant. But I mean, it took. You guys know who Wayne Shorter is? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. Some people don't know. So okay. When I got called to play with Wayne Shorter, at like the first few gigs, he would give me like hand gestures, and he would talk about colors and movies, and I had no idea what he wanted. So the more he talked, the worst I played. I just got super stiff. I was afraid to do anything. And it just got worse and worse and worse. So it was like the fourth gig or fifth gig. And I think there was this festival we were doing in Canada where I was young, right? And I just said, oh, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to play what I want. I figured I was going to be fired anyway. So that show I came out and I just played what I heard. Oh, just to preface this, so since he brought up Wayne, we were playing this material from his album. It's an album called High Life. So it wasn't the acoustic jazz stuff, it was more electric, but the album had all backbeat on it, these beautiful compositions, but he didn't want that. But he didn't produce the album. But anyway, so when we were out there playing, he said, don't play a backbeat. And I was thinking, what in the world am I going to play? Because the whole album is just backbeat. He said, don't play a backbeat. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, that's when he started talking about colors and all this stuff. And I said, well, why can't I play a backbeat? And he said, it just sounds like disco. If you play a backbeat, it sounds like disco to me. So I had to find a way to play this music, which wasn't swinging. It was straight eighths. It was all electric. Try to get that to move in a certain way, be interactive with the band, keep the time like super crazy solid, and have it sound like it was, playing almost like an acoustic situation, like an acoustic swing situation, but it had nothing to do with acoustic swing. So it was sort of finding another way to hold the band together and improvise, but in this context. And he gave me other than his metaphors, I had no idea what he wanted. He just said, do not play a backbeat. So that's where the practice came in, okay, I can't play a backbeat. So what can I do to make this thing groove and to interact and support everyone's solos and to be able to solo and do all of those things without a backbeat. And that's one of the reasons why I really started concentrating on time, space, texture, not just in an acoustic situation, but in an electric situation. So anyway, this particular show, I just decided I was going to play exactly just what I heard and not worry about it. So after the show, he said, that's it. That was perfect. So he's not really the greatest example of someone pointing out exactly what was wrong, but I knew that something was wrong.
What about the Brecker Brothers?
The Brecker Brothers, you guys know who the Brecker Brothers are? Okay, I always have to check. The Brecker Brothers, that was a little bit different because...
Let me add another question.
Yeah.
When you got hired, did you know the music before you joined the band?
I knew, the well-known sort of classics, like from heavy metal bebop and strap hanging and all that stuff. All the Brecker all the sort of classic Brecker Brothers stuff I knew, but most of the stuff was new. And what happened was, I'll try real quick. When I got called to play with the Brecker Brothers, most of it wasn't the older. It was some of the older stuff. But they were doing a new album at the time, and every drummer in New York was auditioning for the Brecker Brothers. I didn't audition. I just decided I wasn't going to audition for anything. I was just going to play. But everyone auditioned. Every drummer in New York auditioned. Dave Weckl had done the gig, Lenny White had done the gig, Dennis Chambers had done it, and they were just looking for something different. And so I was playing with a bunch of people around town, a bunch of people that knew Mike, and a lot of the guys in the band had played with me around town. I was, so I had played with Victor Bailey and some names, and I was touring with Santana for the first time. I played with Santana twice. So the first time I was with Santana, I was working with him. I knew the Breckers were looking for a drummer, but I wasn't going to audition. So what happened was I had been playing with Randy Brecker for years, and Randy kept trying to get his brother to listen to me, and Mike was like, yeah, whatever. He couldn't get Mike to come down. So one night Mike came down and saw me playing with this trio, and then Mike said, I really want you to play in this band. So I had to make a decision to leave Santana to do the Brecker Brothers. But it was all new music, so I didn't get a chance to rehearse or anything. They wanted me to go straight into the studio, and that's when we did African Skies. So at that point, my mission was to just learn all of this new stuff. And I had to go in and record like the hardest tune on the record. So I was pretty nervous about that. It was like a sequencer, and it was a fairly involved piece, but that was what I was focused on. So that went well. And then when we went out on the road, then you start playing with people every night in different venues. That's when you can hear what's happening. And Randy would never say anything. Randy was always, "Oh, you sound great," But Mike was more discerning, and so Mike would say, Can you lay back at this part of the tune, or can you just tip, and just make it? He would say things like, "Can you make it sound bigger?" He didn't necessarily say, "Can you pull the beat back?" He just said, "Make it sound bigger." And in some ways, he said, "Can you lay back?" So I knew that he didn't want it to slow down. I knew that he just wanted to sound like there was more space, like, per beat. So you have to learn how to interpret these things. That was a kind example. There were some unkind examples, but a lot of guys leading up to that would say, you need to work on this, or you need to work on that. So yeah, there were a lot of situations where I learned a lot from just playing with, like I said, people that were a lot more experienced than me and older than me. Yes.
Going on like mentally when you play, like where is your focus, like you focus on what you play, like seriously, or you kind of try to listen, like in your head what's going on there?
Do you mean when I'm playing with a band, or like soloing, or?
Like when you play and you have to lay something down.
Just listening to what everyone is doing, like listening to where the bass player is placing his notes. If there's a keyboard, whomever's playing, like what they're doing and where they're hearing everything. And you have to determine sometimes, are they playing something in a place where they think it should be, or are they relying on you to just be really strong, and they sort of like swim around your time? You have to, you know what I mean? Like, and sometimes that's not obvious, because when I was younger, again, I would be in certain situations where I'm playing with someone for the first time or the first gig, and they're all pulling everything back. They're behind everything. And then I'm thinking, am I speeding up, or why are they so far behind? So one or two things can happen. You can think to yourself, oh, since I'm the youngest person in the band, maybe they're telling me I need to slow down by pulling it back. So, okay, I would do that. And then they turn around and say, you're slowing down. Oh, so it was confusing. But then I realized, oh, okay, they don't want me to slow down. They're just pulling it back. So I need to do my job. I need to hold that together and just make sure this is where it is, which changes everything. It changes how you play. I mean, when you know that's the situation, then you can just relax and say, okay, I don't have to. They can pull it as far back as they want. That doesn't affect what I do. I'm listening to them, but now I know what's going on. So when I know what's going on, then I can comp and hold it together appropriately. And so when it's time for me to play something, if I'm playing fills or if I'm, improvising or adding things, throwing out ideas, I know where to put it. But that's another thing. A lot of it is mental. It's just knowing what the objective is. Why are they doing that? If you understand what's going on, then it's easier for you to do your job. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. I'm hearing what they're doing, and I'm making sure that what I'm doing feels right for the music. So you can't just do one thing. Okay, you drive. Do you drive? Do you drive a car? Did you say yes? Yes. Okay, so this might sound like a stupid analogy, but it isn't. So when you drive, you're doing like 1,000 things simultaneously all the time. You're driving, you're reading signs, something comes in front of you, you'll brake, you'll slow down. No, not tech. You'll slow down. If the road is closed, you'll take another route. You're doing all of these things. You're concentrating on everything that's happening. At the same time, you're doing something that's second nature to you. The techniques of driving, that's a technique. So you're not thinking about the fundamentals. You got that. You're worried about all this other stuff. So you have to do this. Like you have to become a clear conduit. It's not that you have to do, but myself, what I try to do is to take myself out of the equation. I check my ego at the door. It's not me, it's the music and what needs to be done. But that's where the practice comes in, so that you can do this without thinking about it. So you can concentrate on placement, phrasing, texture, tone, note placement, and your chops and your technique, they're just there. So I'm concentrating on all these things, everything. Well, everything but the technical part, because that's where all that practice comes in. Any other questions outside of that? How much time do we have? 10 minutes? Wow. Well, I was going to get into some other things, but we don't have time. So maybe I'll play another tune. Exactly. All right. Just to let you know, the first tune that I played was a tune called Ghost. And I wrote that for an album that's coming out pretty soon. This one is called Electric Wildlife, and this one is old, and it's in 13/8. Well, most of it's in 13/8. And this hopefully will give you some idea of like what I was talking about with note placement and kind of controlling the space and the groove and how all of those things fit together. So anyway, thank you for coming out. Can you turn this up just a little bit more?